Okay, hello everybody. Can you all hear me okay? Fantastic. Okay, so thanks for joining me today. My name is Julian Hicks, and I'm what they call a privacy SME at Big Data. What does that mean? It means I get to talk to audiences such as yourselves about all things privacy, and also, of course, about our solution. So my first question for everybody is, who's familiar with GDPR? Yep, a few. Who of you are actually in the privacy office? One or two. So most of you are really data experts. And that's your sort of normal. Are you in security or other areas? Okay. No worries. I've got a bit of a flavour for the audience. So today, there's the agenda. Hopefully this is what you're wanting to see. We're going to be talking about, in the first half, the data management challenges, okay? And there are many of them. And as the slide says, where is the data? What is the data? What's in the data? How do I actually find something in the data? And as we know, we're at a big data conference. There's a lot of data out there in the world. Businesses have many petabytes of information. So how do you find that? And we're going to touch on how we do it at BigID. The second part, I'm going to take you through some of the privacy applications that can actually help you operationalize the data that you're finding. And that's the important part. Making it useful for use by the privacy office and other individuals in the organization. So with that, let's begin. A fairly familiar slide, the iceberg. At the top, we got some data that we know about. Fantastic. But then below that waterline, a lot of other data that's just out there in our infrastructure, stored on many types of data source. But what is it? It's business data, regulated data, redundant, obsolete, and trivial data, which is what ROT is. So when we think about privacy regulations, that's where they start to apply. We've got this information, but how do we go about protecting it and looking after it for what we call the data subjects, basically you and I? Okay, because that's the thing with this. I think we often forget to consider the personal element in this. This data could be our personal employee data. Okay, it's not just for the business that we might work for. It may be about us, or it may be we've got, some. We're actually a customer of another organization and they're holding our financial records. The point being, we really do hope they know about it. So we hope we're up there in that top segment and not down there in that bottom quadrant where it's kind of just out there somewhere without any real understanding. Make sense, everybody? Okay, so regulations, lots of them. They're just a few of them. I mentioned at the beginning, who knows about GDPR? A few hands go up. We're all involved in GDPR, being the UK regulation for handling privacy. But many other regulations out there in different sectors and markets, okay? So it's not all just about helping people with their data rights. It's also about organizational, sectoral, if you will, like HIPAA, for compliance in the US, or COPPA, where they manage children's data, that sort of thing. There's different regulations to handle all these things. And as a privacy professional, our role is to keep abreast of these regulations, to understand what they mean to us as a privacy officer in a business, how we impact it. If our business is global facing and we're moving data between countries, well, that's fine, but we've got a regulation at this end, maybe the GDPR, but maybe then we've got something else at the other end that also governs the data. So we've got to think about those things. We've got to manage them, okay? And cross-border transfer of information is actually quite a hot topic at the moment, okay? So it's understanding, what happens when it goes outside the borders of our country, perhaps, goes somewhere else, and they start to process it. What do they do with it? And we've seen many court cases recently, or a court case recently, commonly known as the Schrems 2, where the US have been processing data, but the European Union feels the US law enforcement has too many rights over actually looking at the data of European citizens. So that's been a problem. Anyway, the point being, lots of regulations that we have to think about and deal with, and not just in privacy, security, financial, healthcare, etc. So with that in mind, we got modern data landscapes. We're here today at the Big Data event. People are showcasing the different types of ways to store data, and in data lakes and different storage devices, and in the cloud, pipelines, etc., etc. But you've got to be able to see across all that with some sort of solution to be able to help you understand what you've got, where it is, what's in it, and what you need to know about, because it's all about knowing the data. Okay? Does this sort of diagram resonate with everybody in the audience? This is what you're dealing with on a daily basis, presumably. Yes? A few nods, a few hands. Cool. So with our solution from BigID, and I'm going to talk about it, obviously, so I'd like you to know more about it. And just out of interest, actually, give me a show of hands. Who does know about BigID? Just a few of you. Okay, well, let me just give you a few words about what we are as a company. Formed back in 2016 and focused very much on data discovery. Okay, so that's what we do at the core of our solution. So being able to look across this type of environment and find information and make it useful. And then on top of that, we can lay out applications that help us operationalize information. Okay? So how does that make us different from our competitors? Well, as I say, we've got a very strong core foundation of a solution. And when we think of on the privacy side of things, which is my focus, the competitors often started at what I call the top-down level. They created an application framework where they could be used in the privacy office to move away from typical spreadsheet work of questionnaires, of managing data inventory at a spreadsheet level and workflows. But that's what they did. They did that bit. What they didn't really do is get to grips with the data. Whereas we came in at the data level. We wanted to know what's important. Empower people with real information about what's in your infrastructure. Allow you to find sensitive data. Allow you to find other data, because maybe you're more interested in audit. Okay, so you might want to find what's been accessed, where it is, the volumes of it, and so on and so forth. Point being, we came in at that data level. And today now, we bridge that gap. We also have applications at the top level. So we're now bringing together the bottom-up approach with the top-down approach. And we'll talk a bit more about that as I go through the presentation. So how do we do it? So I've mentioned data sources. Out of the box, we have many ways to connect to different types of data source. Just a few there in that graphic on the far side, feeding into our core solution. So as I alluded to earlier, it's about discovery. And different techniques. You can just about make out these things here: classification, clustering, correlation, and catalog. They are what we call the 4 Cs. They're the core ingredient of the solution. That's what allows us to truly find data, find the things you want to know about, and give it some meaning, add real value to it. Okay? And we're not using just regex. Yes, we've got some regex in there, but we've also got newer technology, more AI technologies, for want of a better word, things like machine learning and other mechanisms to really bring the data to life and start making it available through dashboards and reports and other means. Okay? So that's really what we're explaining here. Okay? So typically we're starting off with, it's called catalog, but really think of it as a metadata registry. I think that's probably a better term for it. Because we don't take a copy of your data. We actually create indexing, and we have metadata. Okay? And remember, we've got all those connections going out, scanning your environment, and then centralizing that detail so we can find things. From a regulatory perspective, because we know where stuff is, it means we can start to action requests for things like data subject access rights requests. Okay? They have short timescales in which to respond to that person making that request. GDPR, it's 30 days. The point is, if you know where your data is, you can quickly find it and action your request. But if you don't understand your data landscape, what do? You have to go and ask maybe IT, and they're going to have to do something to discover it. You may have to go and ask a data owner who owns an IDB database. Where's the data? They have to go through it, find it, and surface it. So you end up involving an awful lot of people to help satisfy a data subject access request. That's time consuming, it's effort. But if you've scanned it, you understand it, you can make that much more automated. And that's a key thing with the product. It's about automation, making life easier and empowering you as professionals, either in the privacy side of it, maybe governance, security, whatever, to have the data more at your fingertips without having to rely on others all the time to inform you. So these mechanisms, they're described quite nicely in these little sections. As I say, machine learning. It's a great way to sort of go beyond regex and start to have a system that you can start tailoring. You can help it learn. You can get it to think more. Ooh, I've got a little fly whizzing around. You can help it to think about really what you're interested in and surface that information. So it's about training that environment to your needs, which is important. So we call this the hockey puck slide, okay? Or think of it maybe as a layer cake. So I've mentioned already, connect to your data. Out of the box, lots of connection capability to help you initially establish all the connections to your environment. So different types of data sources, all described down there. There's many more of them. I won't go into it. Point being, it helps you make that first connectivity to find what you need. Then on top of that, we're doing our 4 Cs. I touched on it a moment ago, the cataloging, the classification. We're starting then to identify and find and give meaning to the data that's in your data sources. On top of it, action it. So a suite of applications for privacy, security, governance. I'm going to focus more on the privacy stuff today. And that's what we can do at that level there. Okay? Modular, easy to use, and designed to make life simpler for everybody, especially in the privacy office. As I said, many enterprises out there typically use spreadsheets, even today, to actually manage a lot of the processes in the privacy world. We want to take them away from that and give them something much more manageable and easy to use. And that's what we can do. So a little list, it's just showing really some of these applications. So as I mentioned earlier, self-updating PI inventory. So we're not relying on assessments or questionnaires, which are typically what we see out there, to help the privacy office keep a record of what data they're processing for data subjects. We have a self-updating solution. We're doing the scanning. We're putting data available, making it available into the privacy applications. Okay, so that's bridging that gap that I mentioned earlier. Data access and deletion, automation. So we've got to think also about how long do we keep the data? Because regulations require us to have control over storage limitation, storage minimization is the other word for it. Okay? So if you've got applications that can automate some of that, that can be policy-based to trigger alerts, perhaps say, this data now needs to be removed, or even just do it automatically, which is what we can provide, then that's a benefit. Mapping and records of processing activity. So that's what ROPA means, records of processing activity. It's a privacy thing, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's quite straightforward. It's basically, there is a requirement for business to document any business process that processes personal data. And there are a whole number of, if you will, legal kind of questions that are typically responded to describe this. So that when a regulator comes along, they can say, show me your records of processing for your business. And then you can do that. You can say, yep, here's our HR process for onboarding new employees, and these are the personal data elements or attributes that we process, and this is how we do it, and this is how we're complying with regulations. These are the security aspects that we're applying to manage it and protect it. That's what we have to think about. That's what records of processing is. PIAs and TIAs. So I've mentioned the word assessments, surveys, questionnaires, call them what you will. These are used very heavily within the privacy world to get information from other people in our organization. Because I've mentioned the privacy office, and it's not just the privacy office. This is a broad group of people across the organization that have to be involved in privacy. Okay, so security people, data owners, marketing, sales, other departments all have a part to play in this. And also as employees and individuals, we have a role to play in how we look after the information. So this privacy framework is, again, a very big part of what data protection officers have to do in their daily role. Okay? So, and part of that is assessments. Finding out from others, okay, you're in security, just how do you manage and protect the data you are, responsible for in this environment? Okay? So you're asking those sorts of questions, you need to get the information back, review it, understand it, ensure that you have a level of compliance, because it's all about, as I said, demonstrating a level of compliance to the actual auditors or regulators who come along. Okay? Consent, another hot topic at the moment. Consent for everything. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with cookie consent, so those banners that pop up when you log onto websites and you sort of say, yes, I consent to tracking, no, I don't. Some are more verbose than others. That's part of consent around advertising and marketing. There is also another type of consent around user preferences, so things that we choose to opt in or opt out of as part of what we do and what we want to see. Do we want a newsletter or something else? Maybe we don't. The point is, that's what consent is. And then self-service privacy and preferences. So again, making these things easier for our customers, our people that are using our services to actually make their rights requests. Maybe they want to say to us, I want my data deleted, the right to be forgotten. How do you do it? Well, if you provide them with a nice form, that you've created as a business, you provide it to your website, they can use it, that's how you can do it. So again, features and functions that we can provide here at BigID. And we'll look at that in a bit more in a minute. And of course, other apps in these other areas as well. Okay. So let's just touch on this. The one thing I want to pick up on this slide is the data first approach. So I did touch on it earlier. It's bridging that gap. It's bringing that bottom-up approach to the top-down approach. So data first, we're driving information, making it available to not just the privacy office, but the other departments. Okay? And that empowers you. It means you can speed things up, and you're not reliant on just information that's being passed along via questionnaires or surveys. Okay? It's all about accuracy. And again, it's about operational efficiency. As a privacy officer in that role, if I can sort of start to see some information and I can easily manipulate it myself, that's good for me. Okay? So I'm not expecting data privacy officers to become data experts. That's what you guys probably do. But in that role, the more information I've got to hand, the more indication of how compliant I might be, and the greater understanding I have as a privacy office of my environment, and that's important. So use cases, I really have just touched on these anyway. So we've got the inventory and mapping. So seeing how data might flow through our organization. Earlier I mentioned data transfers cross-border. If you've got a nice diagram that shows you how things might be flowing from one country to another, how there are maybe data sources where there may be users residing and who's touching what, then that's all part of that data mapping. So visual diagrams help. I'm a visual kind of person. I like to see those sorts of things. They make life easier. A picture paints 1,000 words. Preference management, as I said, making it easy for our data subjects or our customers to make those requests of us as a business, and so that we can action their requests in time. Rights fulfillment automation, similar sort of thing. We touched on the other items, but again, it's this whole life cycle of data management from beginning to end. And these things are really very much end-to-end processes. From that first time we get information to what we do with it, to the time that we actually delete it. Okay? So if you've got systems and processes to help you with that, then that's what you need. And risk mitigation. So a key part of being a privacy officer is understanding risk, thinking about what might happen. To do that, again, we use, questionnaires, and often we're using a level of risk within the questionnaire to help us gauge responses to some of those questions. Okay? And that's what we can provide. Okay? Our solution allows us to set up a level of risk and then give us an overall score at the end to make us think, oh, yeah, right. Okay, we're processing data perhaps about minors. I mean children, not actually minors that go in the ground, but children. So if we're doing that, then within GDPR, there are obligations around us to ensure we get the right level of consent and that they are the appropriate age. The point is, these are the sort of things around risk. Those would flag up an area of risk that we need to think about and do more to ensure we're doing the right thing with the data. Apps and capabilities, I won't dig into it, we've already touched on that one. So what does it look like? We've got a number of modules in our solution. So we're thinking about personal information and personally identifiable information, typically often known as personal data or sensitive data. A couple of key areas that are important to think about and have different obligations based on the type of data you're using. As a solution, part of our inventory, that's just a top high-level view of the dashboard. Immediately we can surface the data and start to see things about residencies. Where are the data subjects? We can see from a country level. What are the data sources? Are they network file shares? Are they structured data? Are they unstructured data or something else? All different types of, goes back to connections of places data can live. What applications are we using? But importantly, what are the actual attributes of information we're getting back? So for example, if we're processing data about customers, then maybe attributes are things like emails, names and addresses, phone numbers, those types of things. Or maybe if we're moving to the sensitive side, and perhaps we're dealing with medical records, then maybe it's to do with health or biometric data, okay? Point being, we can find this, we can identify it using those 4 C's that I mentioned earlier: cataloging, classification, correlation, etc. Of course, most companies these days are using SaaS. We have a SaaS solution, but if you want it on-premise, again, you can have it on-premise. So we've got the flexibility to work with you and give you what you need. Key thing, we don't copy that data or duplicate it. We're not creating our own data lake of information. We're using metadata, okay? So I touched on the Roper app. Again, a quick look at what it looks like. The point is we can build out business processes to reflect what you do as an organization. So there's just a few examples there. Often one we use for demos is an HR process. We create one and we show some of the questions that might be asked and might need to be thought about by the HR team and the DPO in regards to employee data. And that's kind of what it looks like. But one of the key things to records of processing activities, we can surface what we call insights. So going back to our foundational core discovery, we can bring information up and surface it and make it available into the actual application. So that's what I'm saying about the fact it empowers you to do more with the information. You don't have to sort of send out that survey to get all the answers. We're providing it by insights being provided from the foundational core system into the actual records of processing activity. And this is a GUI interface, simple to use, designed to make it easy for the data protection officer to create these and work with them. It's a key part of what they do. PIAs, I've mentioned assessments. Okay, so privacy impact assessments. This is really not just an app, it's actually an area where we can create different types of assessment. We have customization of assessments, so you can create and tailor one to suit your business needs, to align with the questions that you need to ask of different people in the organization about the data they use. Okay? So that's another key feature we've got there. Privacy portal, I touched on consent. So we have an end-to-end solution for the providing of a form for ingesting requests to verification of the requesters, to actually a workflow for the different types of requests. So think right to be forgotten for deletion. The fact that we can actually delete the data if you want us to do that, or you can make requests of the data subject owners to do it. We're automating that process. Or maybe they want to view the data. Fine, we can do that as well. Because again, it comes down to being able to find it in the first place. And bear in mind, for different regulations, we have different timescales. I mentioned 30 days for GDPR, for responding. That's not a lot of time. And if you've got a massive infrastructure of different data sources, the fact that we've scanned them, we know where data lives, means we can action these requests quickly. And for us, this is quite a game changer. Okay. And consent and preferences. So advertising marketing, we have both a consent and preferences management solution. So that again ties into our privacy portal, allowing us to collect those opt-ins and opt-outs and also update your environments with those requests. So again, another useful feature. Cookie management. We have a cookie management solution. So I mentioned earlier about the banners that appear on websites. And whilst people may think these are annoying, they're important because it's about us, again, as individuals, about us having control over our data, about how advertisers track us and target us with adverts. That's the point of cookie management, okay? And by law, companies have to have a cookie management solution, and we have that and can provide that to you. Retention. So going back to minimization. How long do we keep things? We have a range of policies that we can use out of the box, or we can create to meet your retention requirements and stay also in line with compliance. So a number of options around that. We also integrate with other solutions out there. So many of these will probably be familiar to you in different spaces: security, data governance, privacy. Point being, we work with them. So here we are, mainly in this section here. Today I've been talking about mostly this green section of privacy, but you can see we have integrations with other solutions that are out there and many others. And then my final slide really is also this one. So working with partners out there in that space to again help you get more value out of the information you've got and make it available into our solution. So working together, with these sort of partnerships with these customers, or I should say software providers, to give you more value. So I'm probably looking at these. You may use many of these platforms, something like Tableau. You can actually connect with our environment and do your own specific reporting on the information that you've got through our solution. Okay, so I think I'm actually probably getting close to time. So with that, I'm just going to leave this slide up here and say, we're on booth 308. Let's just take a walk down there. If you'd like to ask questions, please come and see myself or other folks on the booth. We can do some demos at the booth, or ideally, give us your details and we'll give you an online demo, in a quieter environment where we can really focus on your needs and what you want to do. Okay. With that, I'd like to say thank you for joining me, and hope to speak to you at the booth. Thank you.